So Baruch Hashem, I'm back again, and I was asked to give another shiur regarding medical malpractice. So fundamentally, the sugya we're dealing with is tabach uman shekilkel. Any professional doing his job, and he caused damage. And the two fundamentals of the sugya, as we mentioned in the shiur psich on Monday, is a tabach, a shoichet, or a shulchani. And what is the din when a doctor causes damage, medical malpractice? Does it have the same halacha as any other professional? Or maybe is it different? So there's a very famous line in Chazal. Everybody is familiar with, but very few people know what it means. Ein lo ledayin elo ma she'einav royes. And usually this expression is used when a dayan or a rav gives a psak, and then people come to complain, it was different, you didn't know. And the dayan apologizes and he says, I know what I was told, I know what I see. Ein lo ledayin elo ma she'einav royes. That is not what Chazal mean when they say this expression. And this expression is found 3 times in Shas. Sanhedrin Davav, Bavabasa Kuf Lamed, Nideh Dav Chof. And in each of these sugyas, it means something else. So this is B'chlal, an interesting discussion which we won't get into today, maybe at some future time. Many places in Shas, we find the same words exactly with different meanings. Not always does the same expression or the same phrase have the same meaning. And on Mike Silver, I have an entire list. I don't know whether anyone else compiled a list like this of the same phrase, which in different sources has a totally different meaning. And we find that quite a few times. Eidish, Botla, Mekzosa, Botla, Kallah, Palgin, and Debura, and many other signals. What does it mean? Ein lo ledayin elo ma she'einav royes. And what does it have to do with medical malpractice? It has to do. So in Bava Basa Kuf Lamed, the Gemara gives a fundamental rule in Darkei HaPsak, in Darkei HaHeroah. And one of the great Tanoim told his Talmidim, if you hear halacha from me, and you have questions, you have doubts, and it doesn't seem to make sense, then trust your judgment. Ein lo ledayin elo ma she'einav royes. And the fact that I gave a psak is not binding. And if you have a different opinion and you learn the sugi, you think differently, then you are entitled to disagree with me. And the Gemara uses this expression, Ein lo ledayin elo ma she'einav royes, which doesn't mean what his eyes see, but what he thinks and his opinion and his mind. That is what it means in Bava Basa Kuf Lamed. In Nideh Dav Chof, it's totally a different meaning. And in Nideh, we're dealing with Maras Domim. When you bring a Mara to a Chochem, to a Rav, and he sees what he sees, and he gives a psak, doesn't matter whether it's dry or wet, and he doesn't need to be choishish. Maybe the coloring will be different or was different, a dayan paskins, in accordance to what he sees. So in this source, it is your eyes and what your eyes see, not what your mind understands. And that is a totally different sugya. Sugya number 3, Sanhedrin Davav, is the one that is relevant to our discussion and to the sugya we're learning. Ein lo ledayin elo ma she'einav royes. The Gemara says, what an awesome responsibility is for a dayan to paskin halacha. V'dayan le'olam yira atzmo kilu gehenem psuch aloi metachtov v'cherev mitapechet ma'al rosho. You should know it's an awesome responsibility. Shemo yoimar ma li letzar hazeh. People are used to saying mali letzora hazois. The Lashon of the Gemara is mali letzar hazeh. Why get into it? You need to be insane to become a dayan, if it's such a huge responsibility. The Gemara says, no, don't shy away. Ein ledayan ela masha einav royes. And in this source, what it means is, you do your job, you're responsible, you're diligent, you did your best, you're qualified, you have heter heroa, you have smicha, you're qualified to be a dayan, don't shy away. If you do your best, Kadosh Baruch Hu will forgive you, even though you might make mistakes. Shgiyon smiyoven. Human beings make mistakes. And I assume that every posek and every dayan sometimes made mistakes. And that is not a reason to shy away. So in this source, Ein Adayin Ela Masha Ein Avroyes is forgiving. It is about forgiveness. It is an awesome responsibility, but it's not a reason to stay away, to shy away. It is an awesome responsibility, but it's even a greater schus. Ein Ladayin Ela Masha Ein Avroyes. If you weren't mezalzel, you did your best, then you will be forgiven. And that is what the Gemara says regarding a dayan. Comes along the Ramban in Torah Sodom Shara Mechush, and he says the same applies to a doctor. You bear awesome responsibility. Your decisions affect life and death. Shemi yoyme mali letzorazois, mali letzaraze. Ein leroifa ela ma she'eino royes. You do your best. You might make mistakes. You will make mistakes. Not only you might. It's human. It's not a reason to look for a different job. So the Ramban is the one that compares doctors to Rabbanim. In Chazal, we find the expression only regarding a Rav and a dayan. And the Ramban says the same goes to a doctor. And the Ramban, that's the derech of the Ramban to mifarish the Gemara in Bava Kama Pei Heyo Medalev. V'rapo Yarapei Mekan Shenitno Rishus L'Roifa L'Rapois. So on page 266 in our book, in our Sefer, we have the Gemara, V'rapo Yarapei. Look at the Sanya de Berev Shmuel, the Tanya de Berev Shmuel. V'rapo Yarapei Mekan Shenitno Rishus L'Roifa L'Rapois. What is the Chiddush? Shenitno Rishus L'Roifa L'Rapois. Rashi writes, V'lo Amrinan, Rachmone Machi, Ve'iu Masi. We don't say, Kodesh Baruch Hu decided to punish a person. And you salvage that person, and you heal him. Kodesh Baruch Hu decided to strike, and you are the one to go against Ritzon Hashem, against the will of Kodesh Baruch Hu, and you're going to heal him? So the Gemara says, no. Kodesh Baruch Hu strikes, and Kodesh Baruch Hu wants you to heal. That is Ritzon Hashem, and that is a mitzvah. So that is Rashi's interpretation. What's the Chiddush? Mekan shenitne rishus l'roifa l'rapes. Let's have a look at Toises on the spot. Nitne rishus l'roifa v'im tomer. V'hu merape l'chudei shemin elei. Hanemile make b'deyodom. Aval choyle abo midei shemayim. Nere kesoyse gzeres amelech. Kamash malon deshorei. Toises wants to explain, why do we need the kefal aloshon? V'rapo yirapeh. Even if it would be written only v'rapoi, obviously, nitne rishus l'roifa l'rapois. Tois explains, we would have a havamina if a person hurt another, that is the din of choybal v'chaveroi, then a doctor has the right to heal. But if a person fell ill and it's a choyli b'dei shemayim, not another person hurt him, havamina nerikes soisor ritzoin Hashem komashmalon. So Toises agrees fundamentally with Rashi that the revus of Yerape is just Kilshona Gemora, Kepashta Shaloshan, Nitne Rishus, Leroy Falanapis. We would have a havamina that a doctor has no right to heal. Human beings have no right to heal. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mochetz, v'hu merapeh. the one that brought this illness, should take it away. Kamash Malan? No. Kodesh Baruch Hu expects humans to heal, to care for each other, and to heal each other. The Ramban offers a different explanation, which ties in to our sugi of medical malpractice and the responsibility, the liability of a doctor if he makes a mistake. Mekan shenitne reshus leroifa lerapois. Don't shy away. You might make mistakes. You might chas v'sholem even cause a demise of a person. And that is yehereg val yavar, shvichas domim. No, you do your best. And that is Ritzoyin Hashem. So the Ramban compares a doctor to a Rav, to a Poisik, to a Dayan, and that is the Ramban's interpretation in Mekan Shenitne Rishus L'Roif L'Rapois. And the Ramban writes, not only Rishus, Mitzvah as well. So even though you know you're going into a profession that bears immense responsibility, it's not a reason to shy away. Do it. And that is Ritzon Hashem, and that is a mitzvah. So the question is, when does a doctor bear responsibility and when not? And the question is twofold. We're dealing with monetary liability. Do you need to pay if you cause damage? And we're dealing with achrayas kamei shemaya. And these two different areas, these two different aspects, are by a dayan and by a doctor. Because if you're a dayan dealing with monetary issues and you gave a wrong psak and you caused the loss of money to a person, you were mechayiv him to pay even though he doesn't need to pay. Or you pattered the defendant even though he should be paying up. And it also affects Rabbonim in other areas. When we're not dealing with dinamominis, you gave the wrong psak and you caused the person to be over avera. And the same regarding to a doctor. So in the sources we will be discussing in the coming few moments, we will be dealing with monetary liability if a doctor caused damage to a person, caused them to be a balmum, he caused them to be ill, and he can't work, and also achrayas kamei shemaya, a doctor that caused the demise of a person is yechayev golus, like hoireg nefesh bishgogo. And these are the sources we will be dealing with in the coming few moments. I wrote about these sugyas more in the Beinodam L'Mokoim aspect, and not only Beinodam L'Chaveiroi, in two different periods, challenging periods that we've witnessed in Israel and in the entire world in the last few years. 4 or 5 years ago, in the period of Corona. So after a year of COVID, I published a Sefer Minchas Osher on the COVID pandemic. When the Sefer came out, a person approached me with a Sefer and he said, I always admired the Rav greatly, but I didn't know you're a prophet. I didn't know you're a Navi. And I said, will you share with me how you reached the conclusion I'm a Navi? Maybe you'll convince me, because neither did I know that I'm a Navi. So he said, I'm holding this book in my hand. It's 650 pages after a year of COVID. I'm sure you started writing this Sefer 4 years ago. How did you know COVID is coming if you're not a Navi? So I told him, I'm deeply disappointed because you did not convince me, because I did not start writing the Sefer 4 years ago. But in a difficult period, when shilas pile up on your desk and you need to answer, you have siyata d'shmaya. So I didn't start writing this shuvas before the pandemic broke out. So obviously I'm not a Navi. And in that period, we had shilas that we never imagined we will have. And once again, in the past 15 months in this terrible war, so many shilas came up. So Minchas Osher on Corona, there's a tshuva that I wrote to a nurse who was devastated after working 4 shifts nonstop. She attached the patient to a ventilator, to a portable ventilator, and after a few minutes the patient died. And she realized she didn't connect the tubes properly and he wasn't getting oxygen. And she was devastated, as you could imagine. And I wrote a letter of chizuk, starting off with Verapu Yerape, with the Ramban, with what we're discussing now. And she was not to blame at all because they weren't trained to use portable ventilators. This is a machine she wasn't familiar with. And after working 4 shifts, Mesiras Nefesh, without sleeping, and this wasn't a machine she was trained on, then mistakes are inevitable. So I wrote a Michtav Chizuk. A few months ago, I wrote a letter to soldiers that killed their friends in friendly fire, which also in war is inevitable. It happens, especially in urban warfare, when you're fighting in alleys and in buildings, and it happened quite a few times in this terrible war. And they asked, do we need to do tshuva? And I wrote a very lengthy tshuva, and some of these tshuvas were publicized. Hatzada Shova, they were oisik b'mitzvah. The soldiers were oisik b'malchez mitzvah to kill our enemies and to save our people. And that nurse was oisik in atzolos nefoshes. That is the nature of her job. So do your bear responsibility. And in both these cases, we're not dealing with money. We're not dealing with monetary loss. We're dealing with ibid nefashos. And the question is, you more bein adam lemakoi. So let's have a look at 4 different Toseftas, 4 different brises, and they're all on our page 266 in our book. And one source seems to contradict another. And how do we reconcile these 4 brises? And we start off with a brise in Mesechet Makos. Shliach Beis Din sheiko b'reshus Beis Din, harei ze goyla. Shliach Beis Din gives Makos. Lametes. And the person died under his hand. Chayev Golos. Roifa Uman, sheripe b'reshus Beis Din, harei ze goyla. So a doctor administering medicine or doing surgery and a patient died under his hand, horig nefesh b'shgaga, v'goyla chayev Golos. And we do not say, he was doing his duty. He was Mekayim a mitzvah. And he bears no responsibility. No, harei ze goyla. Source number 2 is a brisa Tosefta in Bava Kama. Roifa umen sheripe b'reshus Beis Din ve'hizek pota medini odem v'chayev dinoi mosu l'shamayim. Pota medini odem means hizek. We're not dealing with death. So we're not dealing with golos here, cause loss. And we're dealing with nezek, it is about money. Pota medin adam, chayev b'din hashemayim. There are so many sugyas in Shas where we find the definition, pota b'din adam, chayev b'din hashemayim. Most noteworthy, the Mishnah Bava Kama involved grome ben ezikin. Grome ben ezikin poto. Chayev l'tzeis yedei shemayim. And I wrote a very, very lengthy siman that there are 5 different levels. Let's say Sidei Shemayim is not the same as Chayev B'dinei Shemayim. Close, but not the same. Lefnim Mishuras Adin. That is not, let's say, Sidei Shemayim. Ruach Chachomim Noicha Heimeno, the very last Mishnah Mesechet Shvius. That is a lesser level. So, we're not going to go into this today because it's a totally different sugi. I'm just mentioning. The Brisa says, Dinoi Moso L'Shamayim. It's not exactly Chayev B'dinoi Shamayim, but Dinoi Moso L'Shamayim. So the 5 levels are Chayev B'dinoi Shamayim, Boletzeis Yedei Shamayim, Lefnim Meshuras Adin, Midas Chasidus, Ruach Chachomim Noicha Heimeno. We're not going to go into this sugya. But nevertheless, the Brisa says, Pota b'dina yodam. He bears no liability in Beis Din. He doesn't need to pay. However, dinay mosel shamayim. What does that mean? Does that mean, let's say, the shamayim he needs to pay the entire amount? Or some money b'derech pshara? We go on to Brisa number 3. Shliach Beis Din shuka b'shus Beis Din v'yizik poto אבל חובל יויסה מן הראוי, הרי זה חייב. רויפה אומן שריפה ברשוס בייסדן והזיק, פוטו. חובל יויסה מן הראוי, הרי זה חייב. This Brisa says, sometimes a doctor, and a qualified doctor, ברשוס בייסדן, חובל יויסה מן הראוי, then he bears liability. What does Chovel Yosem and Ra'ui mean? It is obvious that he made a bad decision, and that is a certain level of negligence. Chovel Yosem and Ra'ui Chayev b'dinei Yodom, and not only b'dinei Shemaim. Finally, the last source is a Tosefta in Gittin. And realize that in all these brises, Shliach Bezdin comes together with Roifa Uman. So on the last source, on our sheet, the Brisa Mesechet Gittin, Shliach Bezdin Shiko B'Shes Bezdin Vizik B'Shoigik Potter B'Meizet Chayiv Mipnei Tikkun U'Olam Roifa Uman Sheripa B'Shes Bezdin Vizik B'Shoigik Potter B'Meizet Chayiv Mipnei Tikkun U'Olam. Tikkun U'Olam definitely doesn't relate to B'Meizet Chayiv. B'Meizet Chayiv, Pshita. That's not Tikkun U'Olam. B'Shoigig Poto, Mipnei Tikkun U'Olam. Because, as we have already learned after 2 days dealing with this sugya, Odam Ud Li'Olam, and Mazik is Chayiv even B'Shoigig. So why would a doctor have a different rule? Mipnei Tikkun U'Olam. Because we don't want doctors to stay away. We don't want doctors to be afraid to treat patients. And when a doctor will be afraid to take any risk because he will be a liability, then the ones to suffer at the end of the day will be the patients. And therefore, Tikkun U'Olam, we don't say Odam Ud Li'Olam, Ma B'Shoigig Potu. So these are the important sources. And if we try to reconcile all these brises, I think the maskana would be Chai b'dina Shemayim. And Golus is always Dina Shemayim. Golus is, that is Dina Shemayim. Even though Beis Din imposes on a person to go in Golus, but it's the Din Torah, and it is the equivalent to Chayev b'dinei Shemayim. B'dinei Yodom, Meizid Chayev Shogig Potor. And my interpretation, even though it's a Chiddush what I say now, Meizid Chayev. My Kumashmalon. If he's a Meizid, he's not a doctor. If he's a Meizid, he's a criminal. Why is it relevant that he's a doctor? If a doctor takes a hammer and his neighbor made him nervous and he knocks the daylights out of his neighbor with a hammer, why is it relevant that he's a doctor? If he's a Meizid, then that's not medicine. What's the Chiddush Meizid Chayev? I think Meizid is negligence or gross negligence. In law, there are different levels of negligence. Meizid Chayev doesn't mean when he intended to hurt a person. If that is the case, why is it relevant that he's a doctor? If a person shoots another person, doesn't matter what his profession is. Doesn't matter whether he's a Rav or a doctor or whatever he is. So I think Meizid in this case doesn't mean a person whose intention is to hurt another. Meizid is Poisheya. And sometimes Poisheya and Meizid are one and the same. And the other halacha we learn, Chovel Yoisa Min Hara'ui. And in my interpretation, that is like Meizid. It happened more than once. A doctor removed the wrong kidney. He removed the wrong kidney. What is more common, he drilled the wrong tooth. He wasn't careful in examining the x-ray, and he drilled the wrong tooth. In that case, that is definitely Chovel Yoisa Min Hara'ui. And in that case, he would bear responsibility. So as we see in all these brises, Shliach Bezdin and Roifa go together. The Rambam seems to contradict his own teaching. Because the Rambam in Hilchos Neder by Shliach Beis Din writes that he's poto. Lach toiv eitzim steht bagolus. Machat toves eitzim reshus af kol reshus. Shliach Beis Din b'mitzvah ka'osek is einoi goyle. And on the other hand, the Rambam in Hilchos Loitzeach v'shmiras nefesh writes that roifer shehorag goyle. Where do we have the Rambam? Who knows? Should be very close by here. 269. Harava makas talmido yo shliach beis din shehiku as baladin animne melovoi vehemisoy bishgogo ptura min hagolos shenem tachta veitzim ledvar hashes yotzu ava makas benoi v'harava roides talmido v'shliach beis din harei shogagu v'horgu b'shas asiyas ha-mitzvah and therefore einoi goyle. On the other hand, the Rambam, regarding a doctor, the Rambam paskins goyle. Do we have that one? $270 is the Shulchan Aruch. So let's have a look at the Shulchan Aruch. Yes, yeah, definitely is a mitzvah.
He's asking if there's a mitzvah on every individual become a doctor.
No, but there's a mitzvah to be merapa. There's no mitzvah for every individual to be a shliach beis din. Shliach beis din is a choice. If this is the profession you choose, just as a doctor. And all the Rishonim, including the Ramban, in that very same paragraph, the Rambam writes, even though the Lashon of the Gemara is nitn l'shus l'roifer l'rapis, it's not only l'shus, it is a mitzvah. And what is the source of the mitzvah? Hashovas gufoi, the parsha of Hashovas Aveda. Some Rishonim write v'rapi yarapi. So let's have a look at the Shulchan Aruch, page 270. Nosno ha'toyre l'shus l'roifer l'rapis v'mitzvahi. Shulchan Aruch clearly says it's not only l'shus, it is a mitzvah as well. Ubechlal pikuach nefeshu ve'emoinea atzma yarei ze shoifech domim. And if you could heal, ve'emoinea atzma yarei ze shoifech domim. Va'afilu yesh mi sheyirapeno shaloi mekol odom ozdar chalef slapis. Miu lo yisasik berefua elem ken uboki v'lo yehesham godol mimeno shem lo yiken harei ze shoifech domim. In all the brises, we learned Bereshus Beis Din, and in Shulchan Aruch as well. Let's continue to read the Sif in Shulchan Aruch. Im lochen reise shevich domim, ve'im ripe sheloi Bereshus Beis Din chayiv b'teshlumen, afile im uboki, ve'im ripe Bereshus Beis Din ve'tor ve'izek, potem medina yodom, ve'chayiv b'dina shemayim, ve'im heimes v'noi deloi sheshogag, goyla al yodoi. So the various different brises are included in this sheaf. Golus, yes. Tashlumin, no. The Tosefta, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch talk about Rishus Beis Din. Rishus Beis Din is no longer relevant today. Once, when a doctor wanted to become a doctor, who certified him? The Beis Din. Aruch HaShulchan writes, Siv Beis, Shin Lamed Vav. Today, you need to be certified by the health ministry, whichever country you live in. The authorities need to give you reshus. You need to have a degree. You need to go to medical school. And that is reshus Beis Din bismanenu, writes the Aruch HaShulchan. And I go back to what we discussed 2 days ago, that Rabbonim shouldn't give financial advice. Even more important, the Rabbonim shouldn't give medical advice. And when people ask me for medical advice, I say I might know a tiny little more about medicine than the average Rav, but I'm not a doctor, and I cannot give medical advice. I could apply common sense, and if you tell me what the doctor said, I could help you navigate, but I will never give medical advice. Only doctors could give medical advice. And therefore, Afal Pishu Boki, he thinks he's Boki, but if it's Shelo B'Shus Bezdin, and today the Orcha Shulchan writes that Shus Bezdin means the authorities, then he is Potter. So fundamentally, the din of a doctor is on one hand similar to any other professional. Boki or not Boki. So when you're a Shulchani or you're a Tabach, you need to be a Boki, a doctor, but a doctor needs to be certified. So what does the Shulchan Aruch say? Poter medin odam v'chaya b'din shamayim. The Or Sameach wonders, why does the Shulchan Aruch write that a doctor is chayav golus? If the Rambam paskins that a shliach bezdin is poter magolus, because he's oisik b'mitzvah, why wouldn't that rule apply to a doctor as well? In this very same sieve, the Shulchan Aruch says he has a mitzvah. Now the Shulchan Aruch doesn't deal about golus, because the Shulchan Aruch, following in the footsteps of the Torah, only writes what's noyeg bisman hazeh. Bisman hazeh there is no chiyuv golus. But the Or Sameach writes, according to the Rambam, that a shliach bezdin is poter magolus, the same would apply to a doctor. So the Or Sameach disagrees with the Shulchan Aruch. According to the Orcha Shulchan, goyle, like, is only when there's a certain level of negligence. So let's focus on chiyuv tashlumin and not on golus, because golus isn't nogeya bizman hazeh. Yeah, that is a very interesting comment. I think in days of yore, we're not aware that there were specialties. You know, doctors knew so little about medicine, there was no need for specialties, and probably every doctor was a mumche to everything. There was very little surgery performed, definitely going back hundreds of years and thousands of years. Today, when there are different disciplines and different fields of medicine, does the Shulchan Aruch mean to indicate that the mitzvah is only hatzolas nefoshes? Or the other Rishonim write, the mitzvah is hashavas gufay, and that would apply not only to hatzolas nefoshes. That is a parsha of a shavas aveda. And you have a mitzvah of a shavas aveda when you give back an object that is worth 10 shekel or $5. So a doctor would have a mitzvah just healing people and making them well and making them feel better, and lav dafka hatzolas nefoshes. So every doctor is mekayim a mitzvah when he administers medicine. So if you want to go back and decide when does a doctor bear monetary liability, Kamei Shemaya, we'll talk in a few moments, but monetary liability. Mezid Chayev. And I explained Mezid doesn't mean that he intended to hurt a person. If he intended to hurt a person, then it's irrelevant that he's a doctor. Of course he's Chayev, just like any other criminal. Achoyvel b'chaveiroi. Mezid means negligence. So Afal Pi, on one hand, Chazal were metak and tikkun oilam, that a doctor does not bear liability, because we don't want doctors not to take any risk, and we don't want doctors to shy away from their profession. So that the Sefta says tikkun oilam, he should be potter. We do not say odam u'ed li'olam. We're not mechayev and oines when it comes to medicine. But if he is negligent, yes, and that is also chover yoiser min hara'ui. Shuvas HaTashbitz has a gewaltige chiddush, which is unique, and no one else makes this argument. The Tashbitz argues that there is a difference between a surgeon, let's say, and a doctor that just gives medicine. A doctor that gave the wrong medicine or the wrong prescription, too much or too little, is only a grama ben azikin. It is not direct. It is indirect. If he wouldn't be a doctor, he still would be poter b'dina yodam. If he's a doctor, He's poter even medinei shemayim. But a surgeon, and that fits into the lotion of the Tosefta, choval yoiser men hara'ui. He cut the wrong place, or he cut more than needed. There was a small tumor, and he should have taken out the tumor, and instead of taking out the tumor and the affected area, he cut off far more, and he took out half of the lung, which was totally uncalled for. That is chovel yoisem en hara'ui. So the Tashbet says that is a mazik biyudayim. If he wouldn't be a doctor, he would be chayim l'shalom medina yodam, and he's a doctor chayim medina shemayim. So the Tashbet is the only one that differentiates between direct and indirect damage that a doctor caused, biyudayim or b'derech grama. But if he is a posheya, that would mean garami, and garami is chayiv. So in my opinion, and this is a question that comes up very often, a doctor, the patient and his family feels that he made a terrible mistake. Is it legitimate to file a claim? If you go to Beis Din doesn't have the tools to deal with medical malpractice. Because according to halacha, it is all about what is the monetary loss. And many times there is no monetary loss. The person could keep his job, just a question of sheves. I had a case in which a doctor gave a bad diagnosis, and he thought a child has some stomach cramps, and it was torsion of a testicle, and the child lost the testicle because he arrived in the hospital too late. So, no monetary damage. By a shidduch, would he get less money? No. He doesn't even need to share that when it comes to a shidduch, because a person could have many children with one testicle. It's not something you need to share. But it's pain, and it's suffering, and it's something that shouldn't have happened. The doctor gave a wrong diagnosis. And I gave a heter erkois. Because Beis Din doesn't have the tools to deal with this case. And to me, mishum tikanu oilam, I say tikanu oilam, the doctors should bear responsibility if they make bad decisions, if they're negligent. I think that is tikanu oilam. And so this was indirect, not direct. He didn't do any direct damage, but he made a bad decision. And to me, negligence is mazid. And because Beis Din doesn't have the means to deal with this case, I gave a heter erkois. Go to court. Okay. Every groma failed in koichoi. Koichoi kemasav. Koichoi is direct. When you gave a wrong prescription, it's not koichoi. And therefore, abstaining or not giving the right advice is just like writing a wrong prescription. It is the same. And any medical decision that is negligent, in my opinion, bears liability. And to the extent, because Boti don't have the tools to deal with this, I gave a heter to go to court. So today, doctors nowhere in the world need to pay out of their pocket. They all have insurance. But it definitely will hurt a doctor if the insurance company will be to pay a big sum. His premiums will go up. His reputation would be somewhat diminished. But I think this is important. Doctors should be careful, and they shouldn't be negligent. And therefore, I paskin, it is legitimate to be Terveya, a doctor, but it needs to be gross negligence. And as long as it is in the realm of reasonability, as we see, a doctor is potor mepnei tikkun ha'olam. What is the makor of what? So these questions bring us to a totally different sugya, and that is the sugya of Yarchei, not medical malpractice. But I will answer briefly. I once had a disagreement with Moron Agoin Rabban Leib Steinman, Zechet Tzadik v'Kodesh Levrocha, and I had a very, very special relationship with Rabban Leib. Bnei Abayis used to ask me to come more often because when I come, he's in a good mood, they told me, so they really mamish plead with me. I should come more often because I always lift his spirits when I come in. And my relationship with Rabban Leib really started when I accompanied Moron when he came to visit America, and I came along as the translator or the interpreter. And I always thank Reb Shlomo, my friend, profoundly because he was the one that initiated I should be coming along with Rabban Leib and translate what he has to say. And Rabban Leib felt that even if a person could get a heter Yarchei, it's a doichak, it's a b'di'eved, and it's better to forego your claim. And I say many times, foregoing your claim is wrong because you encourage people to do awful things. And if a person knows that he's going to get away with it, and so I brought sources. When a Beis Din gives a heter to go to Yarchei, the Yarchei are considered like the shliach Beis Din, and that is a lechatchila. And we see the Yarchei as shlichei Beis Din. It's not a gather of dechuya, it's a gather of hutro. You could never go to Yarchei without a heter of Beis Din, but if you have a heter from Beis Din, that is the lechatchila. Is there a difference between an Israeli court and a Goyish court? So when the state was established, some Rabbonim argued that there would be a difference. And the Chazon Ish writes very harshly, and he says an Israeli court that paskins in accordance to non-Jewish laws is even worse than a Goyish court. We cannot expect the Goyish court to paskin in accordance to Choshen Mishpat. But in a Jewish state, in a Jewish court that paskins against the Torah is even worse than a non-Jewish court, and that was the opinion, and that was the psak of the Chazon Ish. So coming back to our sugya, I think there are cases based on the Tosefta that a doctor will bear responsibility, but it needs to be gross negligence. Otherwise, Shulchan Aruch, Chazal, watch over a doctor because we don't want doctors to leave the profession, and we don't want doctors to be afraid of liabilities, of claims, and therefore, as long as he did his job in an elegant way, he bears no responsibility. So the tshuvas I mentioned about soldiers that killed their friends, I brought many sources, about 15 different sources, starting off with Marie Weil, ad achroinei achroinim, person that brought about the demise of an other, even though the story is so clear that he's not to blame at all, still needs tikkunei tshuva. Doesn't bear direct responsibility. And even when he's poter megolus, still bears some responsibility, kamei shemaya, and he needs to be makabel on himself, tikkunei tshuva. Regarding the soldiers, I was extremely makel, because these are decisions that need to make in a fraction of a millisecond. Either you shoot or you're killed. Either you kill or you're killed. And we can't afford, soldiers should be afraid to attack or to shoot, and that would be tragic. Therefore, I wrote at the time, no responsibility. But when those soldiers came home, I did write, they should learn and give tzedakah le'ilui nishmosam of those that were killed by friendly fire. And many achronim say, if the family of those that were killed is poor, support them financially, do good. So today we discussed the din of a roifa, shehizik, and we started off with a comparison between a doctor and a rav. What is the comparison? How does the Ramban compare a doctor to a dayan? I think the comparison is twofold, and it's so powerful. The service they give to the community is essential, necessary, not only necessary and essential, there's no way without it. If people will be afraid to be Rabbanim and Poskim and Dayanim, Nimtzahu olam chorev, ishes re'ehu chayim below. There would be no people to instruct, to guide, to give psak. And the same with doctors. No society could function and survive without doctors, because illness and ailments are part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan. So society desperately needs doctors, and a frum society, a Jewish society, definitely needs Rabbanim and Poskim. And on the other hand, in both these fields, it is inevitable that mistakes will be made. Because a dayan that sits every day in the Torah and a rav that needs to paskin, we are human. Mistakes will be made, both by doctors and by Rabbanim. And therefore, these two fields are similar. So what Chazal say about a dayan, the Ramban says, same rule would apply to doctors. Because in both these fields, the service is of utmost importance, and it is extremely likely and maybe even inevitable that mistakes will be made, and therefore these two areas are incomparable. And Chazal say, on one hand, you need to feel an awesome responsibility, on the other hand, an awesome privilege, and do not shy away. If you will do your best, to the best of your understanding, your knowledge, your insight, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will always be forgiving. So the responsibility is not a reason to stay away, to shy away. The responsibility is a reason to take your job seriously and to treat the community, doctors in their way and Rabbanim in their way. Yehi ratzon shelo nakoshel b'dvar halacha.